you, Gordon. Thank you, Connor, for coming on the show. Always a pleasure chatting with you both. Before we get started, I'd like to have you introduce yourself to folks who may not be aware of you.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll start. We'll go with old before better. So I have been in the business world literally since I got out of college, but primarily in the direct selling space. Mm-hmm. I have going on 33 years worth of experience in that space. Have been on the field side, so was successful with my partner in building one of the top 10 largest distributorships globally. Just to give you a perspective, over 10 billion in sales in just our organization. So understood that side of it. The last 5 or 6 years, I've been very much on the modernization and industry side. And in that context, I'm very involved with the DSA. I'm on the research committee, their government relations committee. I'm the liaison between the Direct Selling Education Foundation and their 247 academic fellows. And I'm also on the board of the Direct Selling Education Foundation. And between that, the technology company that we built that services a number of direct selling companies, and my consulting work, I'm pretty much considered an expert on all things direct selling, which hopefully we get a chance to talk about, is in a massive evolutionary period at this point. So I'll let you go now, Connor.
Awesome, thank you. Well, I don't think I'll have as much experience as Gordon, but so I've been involved heavily in both direct selling and software development. We both co-founded ShapeTech Solutions, which is an IT service company we have several years back. Over the last probably almost 4 or 5 years now, actually, I've been heavily involved in running ShapeTech as the CEO and scaling out our direct selling business. So at this point, we work with 20 plus direct selling companies, ranging at the startup to multi-$100 million a year range, all really focused on providing both custom development and really managing and building applications on top of their IT architecture. So really focusing on how do we revolutionize and modernize the direct selling business, primarily around applications for the field, e-commerce, the whole entire gambit. So hopefully be a really good complement to Gordon's strategy level experience on the modernization side, combined with kind of our execution experience.
Wonderful. Well, thank you both. For the uninitiated, DSA that Gordon referred to is the Direct Selling Association, and both of you, Gordon and Connor, I know have a lot of experiences across the board with a special focus on direct selling in really impacting and optimizing customer experiences. One question that I want to begin with that I ask a lot of our guests is, within your roles, either now or in the past, when your clients or your senior leadership, when they turn to you, what are they sort of relying on you for when it comes to the customer experience? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, Connor, you want to go first, and I'll go after that.
Yeah, so I think it's interesting is I think it falls into 2 categories, especially on the customer experience side. Obviously, as CEO, I spent a lot of my times in business, managing the business and those kind of more internal elements. However, still do stay involved on several of client projects. So I think looking at first from a client project standpoint, I'll take it if I'm a client, what do you expect always? I think it's really responsibility and ownership, the ability to kind of take that project and get it to the finish line, and not only get to the so being true to your word of, hey, this is the budget, this is the timeline, this is what we expect out of it. We expect a quality product. It's being able to deliver that reliably. But I would say the second piece of that is a project never ends at delivery. That's really a lot of times when it starts, because what you find is you kind of have that iterative experience, especially as it starts in users' hands. So I think the second piece of that is they expect some level of ability to help improve that process and help improve that experience for them. I would say on the more internal side, from a customer experience, it's really helping to make the hard decisions. It's being able to say, okay, we need to set up new processes. We need to be able to evaluate how are we delivering our services to customers? Are the products that we're providing, are they good? How can we improve them? Are they making that impact? It's being able to sit down with the team and hold them accountable to that and help them unblock different issues that arise that stop that are stopping us from delivering that customer experience. But I guess, Gordon, I'll hand it over to you though.
Yeah, I would say, Nitin, at the core of it for me, I'm hired for a lot of different reasons. But I would say it is either to figure out what's broke and how to fix it. So I get into a lot of problem identification and hopefully proactively versus somebody having a catastrophic situation that you got to go in and solve. And so I have a very vast array of problems I can solve. So as a change guy and always looking on how do I improve things, it could be in any aspect of the business, any aspect of operations. Could be that I'm pushed into a logistics project or a technology project or something with distributors. But I think what ultimately they count on me for is to exceed whatever expectations they have for me. So one of the things that I've always prided myself in is to make sure that I understand what people want from me and how they're going to measure the success of that. And that's kind of like basic needs 101 to me. And ultimately, if you look at how you develop any relationship, which I consider all my clients' relationships, not sales, expectations have to be met or you create gaps in relationships.
Yeah.
And gaps have to be solved. And then the other one I would say, so it's a value add game to me. It is really about how I add value to the stakeholders that utilize me to do something for them. I would say the other thing that really they count on me for is sort of enhancing connections. So I'm a big believer that all business evolves around the customer experience and customer journey, but in particular, the relationship part of things. So I think when you're building and collaborating with teams, it is critical to understand the power of connection and how it affects your ability to do your job. And when I say connection, I'm just talking about three words: trust, care, and help. So a lot of times in all the experiences that I'm providing or being a part of, I'm trying to make sure that people understand that they can trust me, that I actually care. Kind of one of my mentors used to say, you can pretend to care, but you can't pretend to show up. There's an art form to that. And then ultimately to know that something that they don't have the answer for, I can provide. That's the help component. And that's pretty much how I've always judged myself. And then I guess the last piece is always about impact for me. I think any relationship you have is likely looking to gain something from it. And I call that impact. And, I'm always looking at raising the game to impact things. I think that's why I love the change game, because I can impact more things through it.
No, that's wonderful. Connor, the points you made about the actionability aspect are key. And Gordon, the items I heard you talk about in terms of making the connection, the trust aspect, and tying it all to impact. I think that's super critical. Let me ask you this, Gordon, from a standpoint of improving the customer's experience, right? Especially at the scale or level of organizations that I know you and Connor engage with, currently and in the past. The values that you imbibe in your answerability to your clients or your leadership, how do you guide a company to translate that in improving the experience of their customer, where like in the direct selling business, the customer is not the end consumer, it's the distributor?
Yeah, and I would say that's a big part of what's changing. So to answer that, I kind of want to address that piece of it. Direct selling has historically, since the 70s, been driven around the business opportunity. And it's been really good because it's invited a lot of people into the business. As the marketplace changed, especially as social media has taken hold, there has been a shift. And that shift is now what we call customer-centric. The idea that the most important relationship you have is with customers. And historically, those customers have been distributors because they primarily are your biggest purchaser of your products or services. Today, that is changing. Today, the distribution channel is the priority. End consumers are the priority. It isn't that it is replacing the old model, it is complementing it and making it work better. So when I kind of look at this sort of entire game now, I look at it in that context. And just knowing that we're in an industry that's at the beginning of a customer-centric movement. When I look at traditional business and look at the tools they have, the analytics they have, their understanding of the customer avatar, the customer journey, how they map and measure journeys, all this kind of stuff is new to direct selling. And the companies that we see and are doing it, oh my God, they literally can't keep up with growth. And that's kind of the exciting part. It's that evolutionary period that we're going through, but it's equally where all the challenges are. So for me, I always understand, no matter who I'm working with, our beliefs control every decision and action we take. So it starts there for me. I have to know what somebody believes. If you believe recruiting solves everything, then you're going to rely on anything that drives recruiting, not really pay attention to what happens after you recruit.
Right.
So a lot of the change for me is really helping people change their belief structure and their philosophies around the direct selling landscape, the distribution channel and the opportunity. And this is kind of, I guess, maybe, gosh, in my early 20s, I started realizing business is about problems and people, and most problems are people. So I very much became a behavioralist, and I see things from that perspective.
Yeah. Connor, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, and I think, I mean, he covered a good portion of it, but I would say is probably my two comments on that is like one on that changing beliefs is what I've seen is most companies in the industry now recognize, if you talk to any executive leadership, customers are the highest priority. And like every company's like, we want more customers, yet a lot of them struggle with actually increasing that customer number, scaling up their customer base, and especially on the retention side. And there's this kind of like weird contrast between, if you listen to what they say, they want more customers, but if you actually see what they're doing, sometimes it conflicts with that. And I think it happens because at the same time, these companies want more customers, but they also want more revenue. They want to continue to grow and they want to continue to scale. And sometimes like building that customer base requires a step back and requires you to really start to think like, okay, how do we change our customer experience? How do we overhaul these certain processes, certain systems to improve this? And sometimes that overhaul requires a slowing down of growth. And I think what happens is these companies get in such a high growth mindset that sometimes it's easier to continue to do what they're focused on than slow down for a second, build up the necessary infrastructure to really move to that centric model. And I think that's probably been one of the biggest pain points. Is it's easy to say you want to change. It's very hard to sit down and actually change, especially when you're so growth focused in the short term. That'd probably be the first thing. And the second thing I'd say on that's really interesting that we've noticed is Gordon hit it on its head. We're at the emergence of a customer-centric focus. And it's interesting. It's like there's always been this weird pendulum, I would call it, inside the industry. And I'm sure Gordon could talk way better on than I could. Is there's this like opportunity and product pendulum. Like a company, when they want to become more customer focused, they start to look at the product. And they start to say, how do we become product centric? How do we focus all our advertising on the product, the selling system on the product? And then eventually they become so product focused that maybe they return back to the opportunity side and they kind of move between the opportunity and product pendulum. It's interesting is when they've said they want to move to the customer, what it really has been is they want to become they've moved to the really far side of the project pendulum. So for them, focusing on customer means how do we focus on the product? All our advertising is around the product. The customer experience is around the product. But I think that's a very low level way to think about it. I think the next thing we're starting to see in the companies that are really succeeding isn't we sell a product, it's actually we sell a customer experience. Like there is something the customer is buying from us. And the ones that are really succeeding, I think we could even give some examples and talk more on this, are the companies that have said, you know what, we sell this product, but in reality, customers are buying something larger from us. They're buying a healthy lifestyle. They're buying feeling better, a healthy lifestyle. And we just so happen to sell this product to monetize it. And the best part of it is we have a field here who can be part of that experience and be part of that relationship and really drive that experience. And so the companies that are really doing amazing things from the customer experience standpoint have kind of pivoted to, we don't sell a product, we sell an experience. And then how does our field become an integral part of that customer experience?
Yeah, and what I want to add to that is, I always think one of the most simplest behavioral formulas that sort of explains this whole thing is, it's a simple behavioral formula about engagement, because that's ultimately what you're looking for: people to engage with your brand, with your company, with your products, all aspects of your culture. So engagement is, from a behavioral standpoint, the triumph of hope over experience. So if you kind of think about it, if you're having great experiences, then that's the mastery of business to me. However, if you're using an experience or a beginning experience to create hope, which is just your belief system about the future, and you think that's the business, what you're not going to do is to turn hope into reality. Because there's an old adage that hope is a beggar. It requires confirmation through experiences. And today, when I talk about the business and I'm working with people, it is really, how do you master that true experience game? Because even the journey is based around that. And for me, it was just always 5 things. An experience had to be positive. It had to be meaningful, which is really a lot about the emotional component of it. It has to create hope, confirm hope. And then if you manage the journey right, you will elevate hope. And this creates a deeper form of engagement that really allows you to overcome the obstacles that always come up during a journey. There's always something that will create a gap. Yeah. But the more you are focused on the experience piece, the more you can overcome the gaps. And then the last thing I would say is on the evolutionary piece, it has to do with this. The industry is very intuitive. So when I mention kind of old thinking, it's that old thinking that defines everything, what they're going to do, the campaigns, the focus. Today, companies that are successful are heavily reliant on data. So we are evolving into a data-driven company now, and Connor can speak to this more than I can. We have a lot of distributor data. Like, gosh, I can tell you all kinds of things. Customer data, not so much. And this is where you're going to have to see that piece of it build out, because to me, if you're going to create a great customer relationship, you have to understand your customer. That's step number 1. And to me, data really gives you the ability to do that, whether it's qualitative or quantitative.
Yeah. No, I think excellent points, guys. And what I will just resonate over there is, in addition to working with direct sellers, we do a lot of work in other verticals as well. And I'm seeing a similar shift in other industries as well. For example, we just started working with a large manufacturing company, multi-billion-dollar shop, and they focus on basically manufacturing ingredients that go into your everyday consumable items. So for them, their clients are like the Colgates, the Pepsis, the Nestle's of the world. And they are sort of the back office, the manufacturing unit of some of these larger divisions in manufacturing key ingredients that go in. For them too, traditionally the focus was, their journeys that they undertook with us were always B2B in a way. Let's help us understand the businesses that we service. And now in the last couple of years, the shift has now changed. And with the pandemic situation, the shift has accelerated to really sort of focusing on the end consumer, because changes in habits from the end consumer drive changes within their clients, which in turn then impact them as well. So I'm connecting with everything you're saying, but as you know, with change does not come easy, right? Change comes with a lot of challenges. And so one question that I wanted to double click on before we go into how you uncover journeys. I want to talk a lot about that. But before we go there, I want to just understand, if we just look at direct selling industry as a model, what in your mind is, you mentioned, Gordon, that they're intuitive, and there's this shift happening in really making it customer centric. But what is driving this change to be customer centric, to move away from that old model of thinking on just focusing on the distributor? Have some people had successes in focusing on the end consumer, or is this shift being driven by industry leaders like you and Connor? What, in your view, is driving this change, and is this change there to stay long term, or will we see a shift again in the next 2-3 years?
I think in the world today, as much as we're seeing information evolve, and you kind of think over a 2-year period, we probably get more new information than we've collected over the whole history of time we've collected information. So I think change and the speed of change will continue to be part of the DNA of innovation. But to that point, the industry to me is evolving for 2 reasons. One is the marketplace changed. So if I were to go back to, let's call it 2010, because I have data going back on the DSA to about 1984, globally in US. So when you look at it, it's been in a long-term uptrend, but there are times when it kind of flattens and goes a little bit down. So when the social media world kind of started, this industry had always built offline, live events, home meetings, all of a sudden had this new thing called social media and the digital landscape. And we weren't really sure what to do with it. And by the way, that is not unique to direct selling. I think every company ran into that. So as the marketplace changed and the speed of it changed, we didn't have e-commerce back then, like a whole different world. So I think ultimately any company has to understand the marketplace doesn't evolve to you evolve to it. So in my opinion, we've been a little bit slow to evolve to the marketplace. And that marketplace is a really competitive world for consumers. There are so many places they can buy. There are so many similar products, where they buy them, how the customer behavior is different. This has all evolved a lot over the last 10 years. Now, take it forward. In 2016, when I wrote my book, Position Right, what I saw was this kind of leading with opportunity has run its course. And it's not that opportunity, because we always are going to want more people, isn't important. It's that I don't want to devalue recruiting, but at the end of the day, whether it's customer acquisition or recruiting, it's what happens after that ultimately determines the strength of a brand and a company. And that's where the focus has shifted. We started recognizing omni-channel was the way to go, and we had to learn how to do social selling and bring all these tools in because the marketplace required that. And the companies that did that, they're the ones that are doing well. And as I said, still in the early journey. The other was the regulatory environment. There is anybody that understands direct selling, in particular network marketing, would probably tell you that we have a bit of a reputation challenge. And I think that reputation challenge, because I'm certified as a compliant expert with the DSA. So I live a lot now with the government relations and the legislative and regulatory body. And really their issue is the income opportunity. And it's not the opportunity, it's misrepresenting the opportunity. And the same thing kind of goes for the product side of things. We're seeing an increased regulatory focus on consumer protection and ensuring that consumers have the entire story that they should have, that we operate with good practices and that we're not deceptive to people. And most of that deception has been on the opportunity side, and it's occurred for decades. And because of that, you kind of think you overpromise and underdeliver around people's hopes around the opportunity, which means you're going to churn a lot of people over time. You're going to get a bad reputation. This is a big part of also what's driving the changes even the consumer parts, the regulators want direct selling and network marketing companies to have a strong end consumer base. They want commissions paid on the sales of products and services, not recruiting. And in all honesty, I think some people in the industry would tell you this is really challenging. I think it's the greatest gift of all because it's forcing us to evolve. And of course, the last year with the pandemic, everybody had to evolve there. We had to go virtual. We had to get the offline world kind of shut down. Yeah. So there was a lot of evolution there, but I always think it's those two things that drive things. Now, if it's the marketplace and the regulatory, imagine how challenging it is when you have people that think the marketplace hasn't changed and the regulatory isn't paying attention to what they are. And that kind of is what I say, the thinking part of things, where they're still kind of stuck in the wrong thinking, not really seeing what's going on. And if they are, they're really not sure what to do about it. I mean, and Connor could probably talk to this on the technology. A lot of our technology is, they're not sure how to do the things they want to do. And a lot of times we bring solutions and thinking to that. So I think that's always what changes everything. It's those two pieces.
Yeah. Let me ask you this then, if we have people that are watching that, are in the direct selling business, and they're hearing you and Connor talk about customer centricity, customer experience, customer journeys, what would your experience share or advice to them be on how can they uncover some of these challenges? How can they get rolling on optimizing the customer experience?
Yeah. Connor, you want to go?
Yeah, I think we'll probably go back and forth on this one. So
yeah.
There's a lot to cover. So I like to divide it down into two. There's a couple potential ways to look at improving the customer experience. And I always think of it from either the company can take a larger role in the customer experience. So, I mean, simple things like, okay, they might want to set up some customer journeys afterwards. So some like omni-channel notifications, notifications regarding emails, like, and sending out maybe product information, sending out like follow-ups on like how they're using the product, some customer journey pieces like that. They might focus on different promotions, different marketing campaigns. So the company might take a larger role in the experience. However, the second option is for to try and get the distributor to take a larger role in the experience and try and take a certain role. So instead of the company taking responsibility for the customer experience, trying to get the distributor to take not responsibility, but to actually drive a certain experience and improve that experience. I would say that's always an important designation to have. I think the second thing I would really recommend, and we see this across a lot of companies we work with, there's a real shotgun approach to initiatives. So they might have 10 different ideas on, okay, like this is something we could do to improve the customer experience. We could create this referral program, and oh wow, it'd be really cool if we built this customer journey, and oh, we should have this mobile application. So what happens is like they end up having like 10 ideas, and they actively go do each of those ideas. And what you see is like, you see each one get discarded very early. So like, okay, we just launched this referral program. Let's look at it for a month. And then maybe we do like one iteration on it, and we look at how many people are interacting with it and if it brought in any customers. But ultimately, that's basically all we do with it, and then we move on to the next. We move on to the next thing. So I think the shotgun approach creates a situation where they try out a lot of ideas that come from like the corporate top, but none of those ideas really get improved upon. And I think anybody who's ever launched a program can tell you most programs are not met with immediate success. Usually, if you dive into the statistics of any program, what you'll see is there's a handful of power users who are truly utilizing it to its fullest and having mass success. Then you might see a little bit of adoption from the rest of the group and very little success after that. And if you really want to improve that program, you go focus on those power users and you systemize around them, and you iterate on the experiences and the systems that work for those power users. And that's what you implement out to everybody else. So it takes time to produce a successful program. And I think the number one thing I've seen is really just they deploy something and then move on, instead of saying, you know what, we've deployed this. Now it's time to figure out how to make this succeed after 3, after 6, after 12 months, and really focus on iterating it. And then making sure when they are focusing on that iteration, they're getting the information back from the right people and they're looking at the right stats. Because there's so often where like a company will launch a program. I mean, a customer referral program is a great example. It's like a company will launch a customer referral program. Who will they listen to on the success of that customer referral program? They likely have a set of field leaders that they talk to on a daily basis. The chances that those field leaders are also the 6 people that are being successful driving that customer referral program, pretty low. So what happens is they don't get the right information back on how to improve it. And instead they kind of rely on intuition or bad data. When in reality, what they should be doing is probably looking and saying, you know, who are these 5, 10, 15 power users that we have who are generating massive success with this, and how do we systemize around that? So that'd probably be my first piece, but
yeah. No, you know, that's a great point, Connor, because I just want to add over there, you know, a lot of times we see that same thing happen with our clients as well, where they'll do a nice exercise, they'll figure out the journey map, and they'll figure out the process. And then they'll, you know, each stage of the journey may throw up a lot of improvements that they need to make. And then a lot of times we see either they'll spend a lot of resources making all those improvements, or it'll lead to that analysis paralysis on, well, we have a ton of improvements. It looks like the whole process is broken down. And I think, you know, Gordon had made a point earlier on that we stand by as well, which is before you start making those improvements, tie it to impact. You know, tie each of those to the desired impact that you're trying to achieve. And if following through on, so, you know, it gives you that prioritization list on why do you want to focus on something where the impact will only be, you know, 1 or 2% improvement to your revenue or loyalty score or whatever. Why not focus on the ones that have the most impact? And then, you know, do what you're saying, Connor, which is, you know, don't just keep running in a loop. I mean, act on it. And if it doesn't give you that improvement, then think of something else to do. Gordon, you were about to say something?
Yeah, a couple things. So I think, and anybody that is really a true believer, like I am, that ultimately the customer is the only boss in business, understands, you know, because you always hear, how do we scale? How do we scale? How do we scale? So there was a really famous example, I actually put it in my book, with Brian Chesky with Airbnb. And, you know, his business was dying 2 years in. He was connected with Y Combinator, went there. The guy gave him great advice. And that advice was, if you want to scale up, you got to scale down. You know, you got to get in the trenches with your customers, and you can't approach building a good company any other way. And at the time, Brian was living in LA, and he went to New York, and he went and stayed with his customers. And that's where they built all the structure. And I think what Connor's talking about is a similar situation to that. A lot of the executives that run these businesses don't live in the trenches. They should. You know, how hard would it be to call one customer a week and start to understand what that looks like? And even worse, they rely on the wrong people to influence their thinking. So to me, there was always a process for scaling. It's ideation. And then when you ideate something, it's customer discovery and validation. And then from there, you can scale. So just what Connor was talking about is a perfect example. The ideation is an issue because they don't know their customers, because they're not in trenches. When it comes to customer discovery and validation, they're not even listening to the right people. You know, if you got 6 people that are successful, maybe you got to go talk to those 6 people, not 6 people that are just sitting in an ivory tower telling you how to run your business. And I think once you do that and you stay in a constant form of iteration, then you have something you can truly scale. But when sort of the philosophy is more around sales and relationships, and the process is, let's throw anything we can against the wall and see what sticks, and you don't really even do that well, then what you get is basically what I call faucet behavior. You get a business that lives and dies by new business, when in reality, direct selling the success of it is built around critical mass around relationships with a lot of people, in particular customers and your part-timers. And if you can't get those relationships right, none of it works.
Yeah.
So yeah, as I said, I think that now, in all fairness, if the executives have always seen the distributors as a customer, and especially their legacy, their top leaders, that's who they keep talking to, and they're going to have to evolve and recognize that, go look where the performance is, go look where the results are. The innovation isn't going to occur in the boardroom; it's going to occur in the field.
Yeah.
And this is kind of where you have to kind of dig into.
Yeah. So what you said, Gordon, really, I connect with that. And that is something that we recommend to a lot of our clients as well. Because, what happens is, especially as with the journey mapping, the customer experience part, leadership have their own opinions. And those are opinions sometimes that, come from years of having done the work, maybe not being in the trenches anymore, but just, their savvy, their experiences, which have a lot of value. And then at the same time, there's that disconnect that you're talking about not being in the trenches. One experience share that I just wanted to do at this stage was, what we consult with clients is, don't, either just make decisions internally based on what leadership might be telling you, or, going about it in a different way. What we recommend is sort of a hybrid approach, which is begin with sort of that ideation session that you were talking about, which is so missing, right? But have an ideation session with all of your leaders in a room, if you can coordinate their meeting times and schedules, right? But do it, maybe it doesn't have to be a full day, maybe just a couple of hours, and have them talk about how they view different stages of the journey. And I can't tell you, I don't know if you've done that, but I can't tell you how many times those sessions by themselves produce a lot of aha moments, because you'll have one senior leader in, maybe marketing or finance talking about how they view the customer journey or a certain stage of the journey. And you'll have some other leader in ops or distribution or some other department talk about that same stage, and they'll be on pole ends or diametrically opposite pole ends of the same stage of the journey, and they're looking across the room. We do these Zoom workshops now, given the pandemic, and it's amusing to see. It's very interesting, actually. Amusing might be harsh, but it's interesting to see how a dialogue begins, where they're like, hey, John, I never knew you thought about it like that. How can you view it like that? Because they're viewing the same customer, the same stage from their lens. So, when you talked about ideation, it's like something we recommend as a best practice. Hey, before you go start doing the mapping and leveraging all the tools, have an ideation session internally. So within the leadership, you have a sense of how you all are viewing the customer journey. And more importantly, where you now know that there are gaps internally in customer understanding, even with the 4 or 5 key people sitting in the same room.
Yeah, it's funny. We do that on the IT services side. Obviously, for every for every project, we do debriefs. Obviously, after every project goes live, it's been live for a little while. It's funny, you see that a lot is with because we have three major departments that interacts on any project. It's always project management, who's really responsible for coordination of developers, team resources, kind of on that end, and sprint management. But then you have team lead, who's really the technical lead on the project, who's responsible for system architecture, the code quality, DevOps. But then you have client management, who's the one that's actually sitting there working on the project with the client and interact with them and having to handle scope, client communication. And we'll go through the same project, we'll go through the same client exercise, and the perceptive of what happened on the project and the client's experience can vary wildly just between even technical and client management, simply from just their completely different perspectives. And the gaps that we could come back with on a single project, two people have been working very closely together on the project, can be completely different. So it's funny you say that, because you just see that on any time you bring in departments like that.
And then the other thing I would add to this is I've been in a lot of those boardrooms, and what I think is interesting is for collaboration to work. First of all, it has to be blameless. So everybody has to understand that at the end of the day, the company has a vision, and there are certain behaviors that will be necessary. That's the North Star. That's the lens of decisions to turn that vision into reality. But ultimately, when all you have around the table is people that see things the same way, then you don't get innovation. So it's like, how do you bring somebody in that aligns on the things that matters, but yet has a different perspective on how to work the mechanics or different strategies or something along those lines? And what is interesting is companies that hold on to the past. I think of two really good examples of this, where I was brought in to be the new voice. And I got in there and realized, wow, they weren't looking for a new voice. They're just looking for another person to support their voice. And if you're not that person, they're just going to cut your throat. I mean, it's brutal.
Yeah.
But I think ultimately you can change anything if you can change somebody's focus and reframe the meaning they give to things. So there's always ways to go about getting the right people around the room. And when you have those gaps in thinking, to resolve that, because to me, if you don't do that, you're probably not going to do very good in the ideation, and everything afterwards will be bad also.
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely, Gordon. I think that's your wisdom of your years talking with all the boardroom scars you may have. I know we're at the end of our time, but I would be doing a disservice to people watching if I didn't ask you both to just take a few minutes to share, a project or an example of where you leveraged customer journey mapping to really understand the journey that the customer was on. And then if you can talk about any challenges that you faced in the course of that work and what the end result was for that client or that organization that leveraged customer journey mapping as a tool to help optimize the customer experience.
Sure. So I think my internet was a little bit unstable, but I think you're looking for an example of sort of how all this kind of worked to produce a result. Is that correct?
Yeah, from a journey mapping standpoint, any example that you can share where you leverage journey mapping to optimize the customer experience. Just talk about any challenges you faced internally with that client, but what the end result was for them once they were done with that project.
I'll take one that's a couple of years old, but is probably the one that is the most profound that I remember. Was working with one of the larger direct selling companies, and they had a good business doing about 300 million a year globally, but the business was flat for about 6 years. So I was brought into the conversation of like, what do we do to kind of get it moving again and not kind of be flat? And, I recognized where the problem was. And then it was a question of how do I solve it? Because ultimately, they didn't see what I saw, and me just explaining it wasn't going to get the job done. So I recognized what they were doing was they were churning customers. So the net customer growth was basically zero, even though they had a really solid business. So I was in the trenches at an event, met a girl there who is very disciplined, very much built her identity around customers and serving them, very aligned with their mission. But she had the wrong strategy. She was always told everything's about recruiting. And I said, no, it's really about building a customer base. And we shifted the conversation. So I shifted her focus. And for 6 months, I coached her and started taking that thinking and building substance around it. And it turned into an exercise that began to change the dynamics of the company. It started growing again. So it started with her. And the results, all of a sudden, somebody started paying attention. Then I took it to other leaders. So the buy-in required me to build critical mass support in the field. And then it was so successful that then the European operation said, hey, can you come over and teach us what you guys are doing over in the US? But here's the interesting thing. When I looked at it, so I created an initial map. It was called a care funnel, which was really a process map. And it had different components of it, different strategies. Like, good example would be, we had a strategy called One Simple Change. Sometimes with nutrition, it's how people see and feel things. And with the product, you didn't really see and feel it. But boy, when you put some type of a behavioral component, like drink more water or exercise more, all of a sudden you get a result. So we started building it out. But when I was asked to take it to Europe, I recognized the process isn't complete. And I expanded it into a cultural blueprint of, from start to finish, here's how you do this. 4 years later, the company was approaching 800 million a year in sales. And what happened is just what normally has to happen. You get in the trenches, you get aligned with the right people, you produce results, then people pay attention. And sometimes some people have the intuition to see something before it actually occurs. I find if the more stuck they are in thinking, the more you need results to get them to shift. So I think you always have to look at it in that context. How does somebody measure the success of something? How does somebody measure the success of a direct selling company? How does somebody measure the success of a customer experience? These things all matter. And then if they understand that, and they understand that it's ultimately a relationship game, then you can really make progress and bring in the right people. If you don't evolve in that direction, what I find is just a lot of struggle to evolve. And what you're probably seeing, I see it on the traditional side too, what you're seeing, because the necessity to change quickly is these companies are falling backwards very fast. Sales are jumping, profitability is jumping. They're not really sure what to do to solve all this. And to do that, you got to get back to the basics. It's the one thing I always tell people: techniques change, but fundamentals or concepts are universal. They're timeless. If you take a simple concept, what business doesn't want to get a customer? This isn't going to be different 30 years from now. How we get a customer will be. And that's the evolution of the marketplace to me. And I think the more you look at it, and I could give you example after example of that similar process I went through to educate, change. And then the funny part of the story was, as soon as it became popular, it was like, oh, look at what the company built. And it's like, that's their idea and they own it. And it's all kind of funny. But at the end of the day, none of that mattered to me. It was always about impact. And that company is now one of the largest direct selling companies. And honestly, probably one of the best examples of what the industry is headed toward. You're talking about a company that almost 90% of their sales were end consumers. That is unheard of in direct selling. Rock solid. Their product has 42 published studies, all in the Medline database. It is that unique. They're not marketing a collagen product with 500 other people and trying to figure out how to differentiate all that. So I kind of think that ultimately you understand your consumers, you get in the trenches to do that, and you go through the process of doing a better job, and the rest kind of takes care of itself to me.
Now that's a great example, Gordon, because what came out loud and clear to me was, they were lucky, obviously, to connect with you and get you on board. But I think what you brought to the table was getting them to connect with the end customer. And I think, like you said, getting into the trenches, getting as close to the end customer, end consumer, and whatever tools they can deploy, whether it's research or, the fine work that DSA does, but whatever they can to sort of get as close to the consumer, the customer, is really what reaps rich dividends at the end.
Yeah. And the one other thing I would add to that is, I think the greatest strength of leadership is courage, because it takes courage to change.
Yeah.
Every change exercise I went through, I was what I would say unfairly vilified by people that didn't want change. I was the problem. I was the enemy. And then after you kind of push through those obstacles, and there's always obstacles to change. I remember this one lady I saw, she said something I never forgot, that no dream is possible unless it's greater than your largest obstacle. The obstacles are always out there, and they tend to be people that don't agree with change. And they can be pretty brutal. And to be honest with you, I think a lot of leaders don't evolve because of fear. I think fear consumes them, and therefore they're afraid to make decisions. So they try to hold on to what they know, not understanding the long-term consequences of that. But great leaders live in a state of innovation. They seek people that think that way, and they're always trying to get better at the core fundamentals that drive success, in my opinion, in any business. So I think that's really what it comes down to for me.
Connor, any words on that? I know that's a tough act to follow.
A tough follow-up. No, I mean, I think definitely spot on. I mean, one story is just a great highlight of kind of what we're saying on the. I know knowing the story is finding that kind of if you want to drive, for example, customer experience, finding that power user, finding that person that truly exemplifies the behavior you want to build, and basically really going deep with exploring why does that work, how does it work, and how do we build systems around that. Because I think when you do that, like they came out with a really strong experience and could actually systemize and scale that out. And when you actually scale it out, you see the real results of it. And definitely agree on the change part. I mean, it's funny. It's like I look at across the board of our clients. They know what's wrong. It's just it's harder to actually change and solve it and have the courage to actually act on the changes that are needed than to identify what's wrong. So I would definitely agree with Gordon on what he just said. On the example side, do you want to? I mean, I can give my own example of a recent project that we just
please
worked on customer mapping that has some similarities, but I think it's probably a little bit more quantitative heavy.
Sure.
And one of that was it was a mid-market company in direct selling. And basically, their goal was. What they realized is they had two main problems. The first problem was is they were bringing in a lot of new consultants to their funnel, yet very few of those new consultants were turning out to actually be successful. They weren't staying. They weren't building good, solid organizations. They weren't recruiting large customer bases and retaining those customer bases. So what we wanted to do was look into why does this happen? Because we want to build solutions to it, and we have the ability to build those solutions. But there's no reason to build a solution if you don't have the information you need to properly evaluate it. So what we did is we went in and what we looked at is we basically took a subset of several thousand consultants and looked at their first 90 days in the business. So we did everything from, okay, let's look at how many customers on average does a consultant have at one day. 7 days, 30 days. Let's look at how many consultants they have. Let's look at if those orders are retaining. So how many of those customers that came in those first 30 days actually retained to month 2, month 3. Let's look if they're advancing in rank. So are they moving up the compensation plan? Let's even see if they're staying after 90 days, after 120 days. So we took all this data and we built out a pretty large map of from days like day 1, day 7, day 30, 60, 90. What did all these stats look like for every single consultant? And using that, we actually built out a segmentation. So what we looked for was, okay, if we segment on all this data, can we find common patterns of what the new consultant experience looks like? By doing that, it's funny is we found basically 3 common patterns across thousands of consultants. And those 3 patterns were, of course, you had what we called the dud. And the dud was somebody who came into the business and never did anything. You just immediately saw them drop off. No customers, no consultants, basically a complete false start. And one, you see that's a significant portion of the field. And it's funny, most of them are really just customers. And because a lot of them stay in the business and they just buy product. They're just customers that got sold on as being a distributor. The second one, though, is what you saw was people that were customer builders. And it's funny, these customer builders were great consultants. They came in, they were loyal to the product. So they had their own product orders and they actually built loyal customer bases and they retained those customer bases. But what's interesting is they only ever built, this company had a discount program. They only ever built to the number of customers needed basically to pay for their. And then eventually what you found is they would either stay on or they would completely drop off and they would do nothing else in the business. And then the final one was the builders, and it was the smallest subset. And it's funny, this company, their entire focus was how do we get more builders on? And I'm like, if you want to drive your revenue here, you're not going to get builders. That customer base group is 3 to 4 times the size of your builder group. go and figure out how to get these customer base people to build more and actually stay. And what we started to find when we looked into the journey was there were major gaps, even though they wanted to promote building a customer base among their consultants and really focus on these like micro entrepreneurs and these customer builders. There were major gaps in their comp plan, their systems across the board that basically disincentivized these people from really entering the business and building how they wanted to build. So when we started to map out those segments, what we were able to do was work with that company to identify potential gaps. And from there, what we're seeing now is new onboarding being built, changes in tools, new compensation plan changes, especially for early. And that's all starting to go live now. So I mean, I'm excited to see what the changes are. But what it really was is it gave us a good idea of where the gaps were and actually who were the segments and what their journeys looked like. Because once we knew the journeys, we could figure out how to improve them.
Yeah. That's a great example, Connor, because, as you were talking about it, the analogy in my mind was it's almost like this knitting ball, right? Where you catch that one thread and then you're pulling. So in your example, you were looking at these consultants that came on board, tracking on their sales, seeing dud shows, double clicking on it further, and you're unraveling a pattern that now then transformed for your client on a complete overhaul of their onboarding process and other systems. I think that's a great example of the value of journey mapping and Gordon, as you were saying, really being customer focused, customer centric, where you're sort of looking at it top down and then being open to innovation, but more importantly, being courageous enough for change.
Yeah, I think that the courage, every time I see change fail, it seems to fail there. The analysis part, the plan is easy. Kind of carrying it through when the obstacle shows up, not so much.
And I would say the last thing that's kind of a funny note on that, and I heard in Gordon's story too, is you can always tell, you can tell when the change is taking place is because the company no longer references it at all as a study or as something that somebody external did. It's part of just the company's normal discussion. It's almost like they've bought into the idea so much, they see it as their own idea. And that's when that's actually going to be effective. It's when they don't see it as their own idea that's where the failure risks really are.
Yeah. And yet the other thing I just want to kind of mention, because I know we're coming to the end, is I mentioned the importance of having new voices. And in that context, I just wanted to thank Gold Research. I had the pleasure of working with your team at the research committee. And I think the product that we put out was amazing. Actually a higher level of product than a lot of what we had done in the past. And you brought in new thinking and new ways of seeing things. It led to new discussions. And I know that over time that turns into better results. So I just wanted to kind of publicly thank you and your team for all the help that you've done and know that it is making a difference. And we are learning, and I imagine we will learn a lot more together and do a lot more projects together. As an industry, we desperately need new voices and people that understand a world we don't understand. And clearly, listening to all the stuff you had done and being part of that, you have a world of understanding that we don't have in our industry. So I wanted to thank you for that.
You're very welcome, Gordon, and I really appreciate it. You saying it, especially from somebody at your stature, at your level of experiences, and all the different professional successes that you've had and your personal successes as well. We learned a lot as well in that project. So thank you again. I'm sure my team watching will also be very happy to be appreciated. I think that was a great project, and we learned a lot as well. And to your point, yes, the direct selling industry is in this moment of change, and if they can sort of follow the guidance and the voice of leaders like you in really focusing on that end customer, that end consumer, then I think more will gain as opposed to gains just being limited to the handful few. So thank you again, both. I think this was a wonderful discussion, and thank you again for taking the time.
Thank you.